growing up in foster care, you just feel so powerless, like you have no influence on where you live, who you get to talk to. I do think that embracing the strength that it takes to even just get through that, you are meant for something so much bigger than yourself. Don't ever forget what you want to do, and don't let people tell you what you're made of, because only you know what that is. And breathe. Breathe.
Welcome to Stronger Than You Think, a podcast by Youth Villages. I'm your host, Alec Ogg. In each episode, you'll hear a story of resilience from a former foster youth. They've overcome unimaginably difficult circumstances, and they'll share a mental health practice that helped them to persevere. You'll also be hearing from mental health professionals who work at Youth Villages. They'll add some clinical perspective on how you can incorporate these mental health tools into your own life so that you can be stronger than you think. Our guest today is Jennifer.
Yeah, I'm so excited. I definitely want to share.
Okay, cool. So Jennifer is not only a former foster youth, she's a current employee at Youth Villages, and she was a past participant in the LifeSet and Scholar programs. You'll also be hearing from Kristen Landers. You may remember her from episode 1. Kristen is a licensed marriage and family therapist with Youth Villages, and she's known Jennifer for a long time.
Oh gosh, I had the blessing of getting to know Jennifer many years ago when she was a part of our Scholar program. We traveled together for events and just spent a good deal of time, so she's amazing.
We'll be referencing LifeSet throughout this episode. LifeSet is a program that acts as a bridge for young people who are aging out of foster care at age 18. It helps to stabilize that tough transition to adulthood by helping young people obtain safe housing, education, employment, life skills, and to build healthy relationships.
LifeSet is a very relational program. LifeSet's built on relationships between young people and their specialists. And without that core foundation of a really healthy relationship, one where there's trust and consistency, you can't really do anything else. I mean, you've got to be able to engage in that kind of relationship with young people. And I think that's what LifeSet does. And that's why young people continue on and have success.
In this episode, we discuss breaking the cycle of generational trauma, the journey of siblings through foster care, and how you can use your experiences to share your story, help other people, and heal through advocacy. Before we get into Jennifer's story, I want to give a quick content warning that this episode contains references that may be triggering and difficult to hear. This includes references to child abuse, sexual abuse, mental and physical abuse, and mental illness. This trigger warning is to empower you as the listener to make a healthy decision about if, when, and how you should consume this episode. If you need support, please look at the links for resources we've listed in the show notes. Now here is Jennifer's story.
Yeah, so I'm Jennifer Rhodes, and I am currently the Scholar Coordinator for Youth Villages. My grandma has this disease called vitiligo. It's an autoimmune disease where her skin is discolored. And so, when you think back that many years ago, people did not know what that really was. And I guess it freaked them out. And so she was abandoned and exiled and put into an orphanage. So she learned survival skills, which was prostitution, using her body, runaway, drug addiction. I know she was severely physically abused and sexually abused as a kid. And then so that was normal for her to subject my mom and her kids to that. And then they were pulled from her. So it's just been this chain reaction of oppression and then continuing on these generational curses. I mean, my mom had 4 kids by the time she was 18, and my dad is significantly older than her. So basically my mom and her sister and her brother, they were all involved in the foster care system. And then, my mom is diagnosed with bipolar disorder, and I think there's other things that play into that as well. I know that she experienced a really, really traumatic childhood. When I was, very small, 3 or 4 years old, my mom was always in and out. And so she had been gone for days. And my brother and he put cookie dough in the microwave because he didn't understand like how to cook when we were hungry. And that was the only thing that was in the fridge. And so it was one of those old microwaves where it's like the minutes. And so he was like, well, just all the minutes. Well, it blew up and like nobody was there. And we're just like hiding in the bathroom, just hungry and scared. I remember my mom coming in and she was so frantic. We hadn't seen her for days at that point, and she was on house arrest because she had an ankle bracelet on and she kept trying to take it off, and she was like screaming and yelling, and then she threw us all in the car and went to my grandma's house. The cops were there. I remember like seeing the trailer, the cop cars. Things got really, really tense. I remember police sirens and my mom like running. And this is one of my very first memories. It was a very, very chaotic night.
Jennifer's mom drove away that night from Tennessee to Maryland, and she wasn't sure if she would ever see her again.
We were placed with my grandma after that.
Unfortunately, things didn't get better at her grandmother's.
Her husband was just very, very, very alcoholic. Just like would break windows out in the trailer and just be like crazy drunk. We were taught how to like steal and how to tie up like a rig on somebody's arm and like help them do their drugs, at the age of 5 and 6, which is so terrifying, that was normal for me. Eventually, starting school, like starting kindergarten, I guess we, looked pretty rough. Like we had like torn up clothes and head lice really bad. And so they filed reports and we were taken, me and my brother were taken from our grandma for like the actual removal part of it. Like my brother is a year older than me and we were removed together. And so he always talks about like how I used to just cry and I just like would not be able to be consoled, and that he would get the chewy like sweet tarts. And he said that was always like what would cheer me up. And he was like, always just reminding me that we're going to be okay. But, we sat in the DCS office for hours. And it's like our mom just went on the run and disappeared. And then we were living with our grandma and there's a lot of like alcoholism and violence there. And then we're in this office where no one's talking to us and we're just kids, like we're just kids. So from there, we were put into a foster home and they were very religious. It was like a culture shock. They were very wealthy, this huge house, but all these kids running around and, like you wear 2 pairs of socks and they have all these like really crazy strict rules. And
2 pairs of socks?
Yeah. That's just something that I always remember because they used to always yell at me for it. So yeah, we lived there for a little while. I would say that I internalized my situation more because I just like naturally like a nurturing person. But my brother, he just handles his trauma in like a more of like he feels like he has to physically like protect himself. And he, was kind of even at a very young age taught that like you're the man of the house and like you take care of things. So he would get really upset when he would be triggered. And so we were moved from foster home to foster home to foster home. A lot of times it would be like if someone disrespected me or if someone did something to me. I remember this one foster home, the mom was just like awful. And like she would just scream at me for very small things. One time he was jumping on the bed in their bedroom. And I mean, we were probably maybe 6 and 7 at this point, maybe a little bit younger. And our biological family was still trying to send us gifts and necklaces and Easter baskets, things like that. Because, even though they had like all of their issues, they still tried to do stuff. And the family didn't give those to us. So when my brother was jumping on their bed and he saw it, he was like, this is yours. Like, this must be yours. It was like this beautiful dress with these like blue roses on them and this like little heart-shaped necklace and a little jewelry box that was Winnie the Pooh. And my nickname when I was growing up was Jenny Pooh. That's what my grandma and everybody called me because I loved Winnie the Pooh. I had that on and I remember the woman seeing it on me and I remember her like grabbing it and ripping it off my neck. And yeah, so I remember him like snapping. and just getting aggressive, fighting, throwing stuff, anything he could do to protect himself and us. That eventually resulted in him getting locked in rooms or, things like that, which was like so hard. And that continued, even until we were like teenagers. We were actually eventually separated. That violent, aggressive, emotional reactions, a lot of people just can't handle it, so they eventually just separated us, which I think made his trauma worse.
Kristen, can you tell us about how the trauma of something like sibling separation can affect behavior in your experience working with young people?
Yeah, I think when you think about siblings, it is one of the most vital relationships that you have in your life. You learn social skills, you learn how to communicate, you learn how to fight well, you learn how to love well. And I think when siblings are unfortunately moved to different homes, that to me is a devastating, sad state, because siblings are oftentimes very safe for each other. And so you've then taken away this other really safe space and this safe person who knows you, who's your family, who understands what you're going through. I think just the deep sadness from that loss is traumatic. And trauma, period, impacts your brain and development. Siblings being separated is no exception to that rule. And I think for those of us working with young people in this setting, we also recognize that young people struggle with trust. Sometimes sessions don't go well. People are angry. They test your boundary to see if you will show up, because young people, unfortunately, are accustomed to unreliable adults and unsafe adults. And so when it gets hard, to me, as a therapist, that's when you lean in the most.
Jennifer and her brother Michael didn't have anyone lean in. At this point, she was 8 years old and they were separated, set to be adopted by different families. Jennifer's adoption fell through at the very last minute, and the state had them adopted by the same family. Unfortunately, the adoption was worse than their experience in foster care.
It was a house that doesn't have central heat and air in the middle of the woods, but there was someone in the home that was doing like really inappropriate things with me. And I never really talked about it because I knew if I did, me and my brother would be separated again. So I just started like leaving the house and staying with friends and just avoiding being at home as much as possible. And so then like around like 14 or 15, like I was basically living at my friend's house. I had a job at McDonald's. I would go to school every day. School's always been really important to me. And my brother was at a group home at that time, and he had finally come back home. And I remember him calling me, and, he was like, sis, like, please come back here. Like, I'm back here. Like, I love you and I miss you. And so I like went to the house, and I was there for literally like one day, the 124-hour period. Everything just went insane. I came home and I, just like went straight up to my brother's room, like didn't really talk to anybody else. And someone called the house phone for me. And I, she like screamed up the stairs at me, and she was like, people don't need to be like calling this, house for you. Like, you have a cell phone, blah, blah, blah. Cause she knew I like paid for my own phone and things like that. My brother had asked me to be there, and I was like, that's why I don't come here, And again, I'm like 15 at this time. So he was like, again, starts like screaming back at her, and he's like, leave her alone, like she's not doing anything. And everybody just starts like yelling at everybody, and then they were like, someone said something about like me never being at the house and thinking that I can just come there whenever I want. And the only rule that they gave was, if you're not home by 8 p.m., stay somewhere else. Like, okay, well, I don't want to be here when I have to like deal with all these other things that happen when I'm here, and nobody knew about that. So that's when I told them what had been happening. And they did not believe me one bit. And then they actually said they didn't care if it did happen. And so then my brother like attacked the person that had been messing with me. And the cops came. It was just chaos. It's just chaos. But my brother was 16 at that time, and where he tried to attack the person with a weapon, he got like a aggravated assault. And just to clarify the weapon, it wasn't like a gun or anything. He got like hedge choppers and like busted out all the windows of the guy's car and stuff. But just to be clear. And I passed out in the back seat of the cop car while they were figuring everything out and taking statements and everything. And because I wasn't allowed to go in the house, I wasn't allowed to leave. And I was just like exhausted, and I just like passed out. When I woke up, like they said, we can't stay there and that they're putting us back in foster care. But my brother was taken to detention because he had now charges. So much of like my brother has happened because he was told to take care of me. And the system wasn't doing what they were supposed to do to make sure he didn't have to do that and that he could heal too. Yeah. So he was put in like a detention center at that point until he was 18. It was like they didn't want us together in a group home. Because they knew, I told them outright, I want to be where Michael is at. We want to be together. Also, we're both birthdays in July, and this all happened in July too. So it was like right of my birthday and his birthday, and it was just really chaotic. And then a weird coincidence that happened, I went to find my biological mom. She had already passed away, and that July was the same July that she passed away. Wow. So if the state had done efforts to try and like relocate or try and identify us with our biological family there, I always think that there could have been a possibility there that we could have met her. So again.
Do you know how the circumstances as to how she passed away?
Addiction. A part of me always knew that this is temporary and this is not what my life is going to stay like. And I know things suck right now, but there's just something inside of me was like, all this is going to be for a reason one day. So just kind of keeping that hope alive that I'm going to have my power.
We're now going to take a quick break to hear a word from our sponsor.
This episode is sponsored by BetterHelp. Without a healthy mind, being truly happy and at peace is hard. The good news is, therapy works. But what is therapy exactly? It's whatever you want it to be. Maybe you're not feeling motivated right now and would like some tools to help. Or maybe you're feeling insecure in relationships or at work, not dealing well with stress. Whatever you need, it's time to stop being ashamed of normal human struggles and start feeling better because you deserve to be happy. And now you don't have to worry about finding an in-person therapist near you to help. BetterHelp is customized online therapy that offers video, phone, and even live chat sessions with your therapist. So you don't have to see anyone on camera if you don't want to. It's much more affordable than in-person therapy, and you can start communicating with your therapist in under 48 hours. Join the millions of people who are seeing what online therapy is really about. It's always a good time to invest in yourself because you are your greatest asset. And special offer to Stronger Than You Think listeners. You can get 10% off your first month of professional therapy at betterhelp.com/stronger. That's betterhelp.com/stronger. Thanks again to BetterHelp for sponsoring this episode.
Before we return to Jennifer's story, we're going to talk to Kristen about the different ways the brain copes with trauma, how Jennifer and her brother Michael can have different responses to the same shared traumatic experience, and how you can better recognize these coping mechanisms if you see them. We'll then learn some tactics that Kristen uses in therapy when working with young people through trauma. So, Kristen, how does the brain cope with trauma?
In lots of different ways. And so people have different responses, right? So I think most people hear about fight or flight, right? We all have a different way that we manage trauma. Some people fight, they're faced with a traumatic event and they fight. Some people are faced with a traumatic event and they fly, they flee, they physically leave. Some people have experienced such trauma that they disassociate. It's the child sitting in the middle of a room with two parents who are engaging in intimate partner violence and they're watching the TV. And it's like they don't even hear it. I mean, your body responds in a way that protects you. So all of those ways are mechanisms that are protecting your brain and sometimes your physical well-being, certainly in the case of flight. And so it's very different for every person. You can be a combination of all three depending on the circumstance. But then what happens with trauma is if you have repeated exposure and you have a repeated coping skill, right, which is fight, flight, or disassociation perhaps, when other incidents occur in different settings, your brain and body automatically responds as it would to a typical trauma event. So you think about kids in classrooms. If there's conflict in a classroom with a teacher, that child may disassociate, may not respond at all. There's a fear response, there's adrenaline. And so teachers will notice, or kids will get in trouble for not participating when they're actually just experiencing, being disassociated because of previous trauma. So it follows you unless you learn your triggers and identify your coping mechanisms. It follows you until you work on the healing of it.
What are some methods you use to work on the healing of it?
Sometimes it's really simple stuff like learning how to regulate yourself physically. You have to learn how to do that for you to succeed in various environments, right? Like you've got to learn how to regulate your emotions. Sometimes you start there. Sometimes we start with just feelings identification. We have a lot of young people who have no idea that there's other emotions besides sad, mad, and happy. There's a whole spectrum of emotions. So sometimes it's just teaching young people emotions.
Could you give some examples of more specific emotions that you've found helpful to label in therapy sessions?
What we find a lot is that sad actually means really hurt, right? It can be hurt. It can be frustrated. It can be, I feel ashamed. I think shame, unfortunately, is a huge experience for young people in this population, to none of their own doing, by the way. Embarrassment, right? So it's really identifying those things and putting labels on them so you can learn to recognize and say, wow, I feel at peace right now. Here's what peace feels like to me. And really putting some words and some language behind that. And once you label things, you probably have had this experience too. It allows you to let them go. Because when you don't label something and sort of call it what it is, you hang on to it. I think shame particularly, right? So you've got to label it, work all the way through it, and then let it go.
Yeah, that was exactly what I was thinking, was to get to the shame and embarrassment.
Shame and embarrassment, yeah.
Those will get you.
Every time.
Yeah. Now, let's get back to Jennifer. At this point, how old are you?
I think I was like 17 and a half, maybe. I was like, I need a car. Like I need a job and I need to be able to get a car because when I turn 18, it's just going to be me. No one's going to have to take care of me or worry about where I'm living or how I'm getting places because, once you turn 18 in the system, you're no longer a child. So it's not the child welfare system's responsibility. So I moved to a foster home. Me and the woman talked a lot and she grew up very similar to me. She actually ended up being from Maryland too. And she never took my anger or my hurt personally. She always understood it and would just be silent and let me be angry. And nobody had ever really let me do that before, I lived with her until I was 18 and she would take me back and forth to work and I saved up to buy a car. And a couple months before I turned 18, I bought a car and got enrolled for college and moved to Nashville.
As Jennifer continued to accomplish her goals, we want to take a second to go back to the woman in her foster home who gave her the space to be angry, and how you can be a better listener when you're talking to someone who's experienced trauma.
To me, it's that unconditional positive regard. And I always think to myself, we all know what it feels like when people are listening to us and when they really hear us. And typically, as the listener, that means you're silent. You know, you're engaged, you're making good eye contact, you're listening, you're paying attention. And I think giving people the opportunity to express their emotions without any judgment about those emotions is the best thing that you can do, because there is no judgment in how you feel. I've had many experiences where, you sit and wait and let people feel heard. I think a lot of times, and this is a bit cliche, but people don't want you to solve their problems. They want you to hear them, and they want to feel heard and solve the problems themselves. And so I think the listening is half of the problem solving. If you have a young person who deems you safe and starts sharing, it's really important to not minimize or say, oh, surely that's not happening. That's not what they mean. It's really being quiet and listening. This is a young person's experience and perception. It's not your opinion of their experience and perception. And so nothing will cut off a conversation like somebody feeling minimized or that you think they're sort of making it up or exaggerating. So I think, again, it's the listening and just letting it happen. There's a lot of discomfort when somebody is sitting in front of you really, really angry or really, really sad. And people tend to either give advice right away, right? Like they just want to solve the problem because they're trying to be helpful, right? They're trying to ease discomfort. It's generally not that helpful. And so I think people, they inadvertently minimize an experience because they're throwing out solutions for something, or they're saying, well, there's no way that couldn't happen. It couldn't be that bad. Are you sure? They're prompting or being skeptical of an experience. And maybe the intention is just to ask questions, but I think the perception for a person in an experience, it feels like, oh, you don't believe me. And I think that's a really common experience for young people in care. You don't believe what I've said. And so here's yet another person that says, oh, I don't believe what you're saying. That's why I think LifeSet has been as successful as it's been, because the staff that work with young people are extremely consistent. They meet with young people every single week, if not more. They are there, walking young people through successes and through failures. And so that constant, repetitive, positive dosing changes and heals your brain. Just that in and of itself is healing. If you did nothing else, but you had a good, regulated relationship, your brain would start healing. So yeah, got to start there.
Speaking of the LifeSet program, it was around this time that Jennifer was introduced to it.
When I turned 18 is actually like when LifeSet came into my life. I was like, oh, okay, cool. Somebody that's not trying to tell me what to do and being realistic with me about how to make my own appointments, how to, get car insurance, get enrolled in school and all these things. They're just someone like genuinely trying to care and help make sure I understood all those processes and I wasn't just out here winging it, with no knowledge. Having 3 people that were just accepting of, even if I was making stupid choices, that they were just accepting and like able to walk me through it was like the most helpful to me, because I had to be, I don't know, like I had to be kind of emotionally closed off, like growing up a little bit, because I was always having to question everybody around me. So I moved from East Tennessee to Nashville. I actually had youth villages follow me and had someone there. And when I was sharing my story and sharing my passions, like my specialist saw the spirit that I had in me, and I started getting asked to do like different speaking opportunities. That's when I actually met one of the other people who were in the Youth Villages program, and she was like, "Hey, I think that you'd be really awesome for this role. Like, would you be interested in doing it?" And so then I got to go to court with, youth who were currently in foster care and help them learn how to stand up for themselves and say like, "Oh, you haven't seen your family. That's a right you have. You have a right to your education. You have a right to say if you don't feel safe in your placement." And, just making sure that somebody is asking those questions and make sure you're not assuming that it's good. And so it's just like through getting my social work degree. And then I went to do an internship where I got to see all these different programs that Youth Villages actually offers and how they work and why they do the things they do and how they do it. And so then that led me onto the track of like policy and procedures. And so then I went to do an internship in DC where I got to like write recommendations for how I think the system could be done better. That's like been super exciting for me.
Kristen, is there a therapeutic benefit to advocating for people who are going through something you went through?
I think there is. I don't think it's for everyone, but I think in Jenny's case in particular, she is a young person who was interested and is interested in learning about herself and her own healing. And I think she's been able to use those experiences to help other people. My guess is in her journey, she has had really stable coach, mentor type of people that have been with her for a long time. And I think the ability for her to engage in those kind of relationships with other people now is definitely a part of the healing process.
Have you seen someone share their story and really help someone else because of that catharsis of maybe a shared experience or, oh, I relate to that?
Absolutely. I mean, we have young people tell their stories that impact our direct staff. They share stories of struggle and triumph. So I think not only as a young person experiencing foster care, hearing a story that feels very familiar, and then I think gives you permission just by default from hearing to share your own story and recognize you're not alone. But it goes beyond that. I mean, I think that the young people we work with and their stories have impacted us as employees and helped us discover things about ourselves and who we are in a way that you would not experience had you not heard someone else's story.
Jennifer now works at Youth Villages.
That's why I love the role that I have, because I think if you saw me walking down the street, you'd never think any of these things of my life. And I would hope that no one assumes that they know what anyone just looking at them has been through. But, there's just so much in the system that I've seen. And I think I experienced it from a really like conscious viewpoint, even from like a young child. And, I've gotten my education. I've put myself in circles to make sure that people take me seriously and by people that are very supportive of the youth voice, because some of these kids are never going to want to talk about this stuff again. They're mad, they're hurt, they don't trust anybody, and they shouldn't. And so, like getting that insight and trying to help make a platform where it's not just what Jennifer experienced or what Michael experienced, but these are the things that are happening to kids every day. And this needs to be acknowledged. So, and yeah, I mean, it's really awesome to have this role that I have, because it just is so important to me to make sure that others who have aged out of the system or who have come from places of like experiencing homelessness or, just like low support or whatever it is that they're challenged with, because just being 18 is hard, being human is hard. And, just being able to be in a program that, makes sure that we're looking at like how we're supporting people to get their education. Because I do think that education is like what pulls you out. And I'm just super grateful to be able to be working in that and also having accomplished my education. And, because it's like 3% of youth that age out of foster care go on to get a bachelor's degree. 3%. That's 20,000 kids a year we're talking about. Like, so just really thinking through like what that means and hopefully like what I'm inspiring in others who are still questioning their self and thinking that the cards that they were dealt, like learning how to play those so they can win, so they can get to a better place.
So you have a little one of your own now, right?
I do, yes.
Okay. Are you comfortable talking a little bit about that?
Yes. So I actually just got back from my internship in DC, and I found out that I was pregnant, and, I'd been with the person that I was with for a few years at that time. And, it was really exciting, but also like really scary, because it's just like, whoa, like I never had like a parent to really teach me what to do. Like I had a lot of examples of what not to do and how not to be, but it's just so like being pregnant and being a mom is like the just happiest place for me, because it's just like, this is what it was all for, like to make sure that I get to love him and protect him and have fun with him. And he like brings that childhood that I didn't really necessarily get to have. Like I get to have that with him. Like I might be like, 4 foot bigger than he is, but I just get to experience the world through his eyes. And just like, he's so funny and he's so creative, and just like his perspective on things. And it's just, being a mom like just makes me so happy. And just knowing that he's never gonna, the trauma stopped, and that he's never gonna have to experience any of that. And I can't imagine anything else to be prouder of in life. And yeah, so 4 generations, and I know that my child's not ever going to go into foster care. And I know that it is a lot of trauma, and it's not easy to break these generational curses. But, just again, trying to have sympathy for what my parents went through and what my grandma went through. Yeah. So Michael is in prison. I'm very hopeful. He has been in prison for about 3 years now. And the thing about prison versus jail is that he actually got some support and mentorship and things like that like he needed to kind of talk through. Prison, you wouldn't think that's the way, but people are there for life, and so people are teaching him lessons that he couldn't accept before, maybe, or wasn't able to see, that he was like replaying these generational curses out unknowingly or unconsciously. But Michael is so freaking smart. But he got beyond smart, always has been since we were kids. And so cool. I just talking to him on the phone more, and like sharing with him about what I do, and him seeing my house when we are on video, and him seeing Rollin and my son, and him just being excited about like playing with him and stuff like that. And it's like, he always just my brother just wants to belong somewhere. He just wants like what we all want. We all want to belong somewhere. And so we've always had home with each other, and now that we've both kind of addressed some of our traumas, that we can like have that strong brother-sister bond that we had all those years.
From Youth Villages, I'd like to say thank you for listening to this episode of Stronger Than You Think. And thank you to Jennifer for sharing your story with us. If you'd like to get involved with Youth Villages, you can go to youthvillages.org, where you can find out more information about our programs and how you can help. If you enjoyed today's episode and want to support the show, the best thing you can do is recommend it to a friend. Maybe share it with someone who you think might need it right now. We'd also love to hear what you thought about today's episode, so write us a review on Apple Podcasts. Production support was provided by Parasar Studios in Memphis, Tennessee. On behalf of Youth Villages, this is Alec Ogg, reminding you that you're stronger than you think.